The private airfield, bright under the midday sun. Sunlight reflected sharply off the luxury jet's fuselage. CEO Victoria Hale, immaculate and confident, stood by the boarding stairs. Before her was Ethan Walker, a single dad in worn clothes holding his child. She smiled, her eyes full of haughty challenge. "Fly it perfectly, and I'll marry you." The small crowd laughed at the arrogant joke. Ethan remained quiet, about to refuse the insult. A technician suddenly rushed up, whispering of an emergency flight failure. Victoria turned back, impatient, repeating the dare more sharply. The man looked up, and the authority in his gaze silenced the entire runway. Ethan Walker, 35, was defined by what he no longer was. His life was a masterpiece of self-imposed simplicity. He was currently employed as a civilian aircraft maintenance technician at a regional private hangar. His work was meticulous, hands-on, and crucially predictable. He chose the flexible hours, the grease under his nails, and the absolute lack of spotlight. It allowed him to be the only stable constant for his 5-year-old daughter, Leo. Leo was his universe. After his wife's unexpected death years ago, a tragedy that had coincided with a professional collapse, Ethan had traded high-stakes heroism for high-quality fatherhood. He had served for a decade as an elite military test pilot, logging thousands of hours flying experimental platforms deemed unstable by conventional metrics. His records were deep within a secure archive, filed under discrete national assets. His exit wasn't just about grief, it was about responsibility. During his last test flight, a momentary sensor failure, a fixable mechanical flaw, had almost cost him the life of his co-pilot. That near disaster, coupled with the loss of his wife, convinced him that he could no longer afford to live a life where his competence was challenged by unpredictable chaos. He sought routine, silence, and predictable mechanics. He was determined to never again gamble his presence against a deadline or a cockpit emergency. Ethan's cover was perfect. To the hangar crew, he was just Ethan, a quiet, dependable mechanic with a genius for identifying subtle airframe stress fractures and hydraulic leaks. No one knew he held a highly classified, multi-engine commercial pilot license. Today, Ethan was only at the private terminal to deliver a specialty navigation gyroscope to the maintenance bay. Leo, tucked safely against his side, was enthralled by the powerful jets. Victoria Hale, 42, was the CEO of Hale Global Ventures, a vast investment firm with significant holdings in aerospace and logistics. She was accustomed to control, speed, and immediate compliance. Her schedule was calculated down to the second. Her private jet was not transportation, it was a high-speed office. She viewed people through the lens of utility. If they couldn't generate revenue or solve a problem immediately, they were part of the background noise. Her motto was efficiency above all. She had zero tolerance for lag, error, or low-tier personnel breaching her orbit. She saw Ethan, a man in an oily jumpsuit holding a small child, as a distraction. He was out of place. The contrast between his scuffed boots and the gleaming platinum step of the jet was offensive to her highly structured view of the world. Her mocking dare was a test, a cruel little game to assert her dominance and underscore the social hierarchy. It was a joke meant to be laughed at. She believed that anyone who settled for a job as a mechanic lacked the necessary drive for true success. The other people on the tarmac, Victoria's assistant, the nervous air traffic coordinator, and the jet's lead technician, all chuckled politely. They saw only the mechanic who wandered up the stairs. They reinforced Victoria's arrogance through their sycophantic agreement. Ethan's philosophy, the one he constantly instilled in Leo, was his armor. He looked down at his daughter. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice tiny. "She's being mean." Ethan tightened his grip on her hand. "Leo," he murmured, keeping his voice steady and low. "Remember what I taught you. Dignity isn't a thing you wear. It's a thing you keep. Don't showcase power you don't need to use. We are here to do a job, not to make a statement." He had taught her that stillness was a form of strength. He decided to withdraw. The insult wasn't worth the energy. He turned to leave, ready to disappear back into the safety of the maintenance sheds. But the scurrying technician, Thomas, stopped him. Thomas was visibly pale. "Ethan," he breathed out, pulling him aside. "There's a major problem. The primary flight computer is throwing catastrophic errors on the pitch and yaw control systems. It's not flyable, and Captain Davies is stuck in Denver due to weather." The critical nature of the situation had finally pierced Victoria's bubble of impatience. Ethan stood motionless for a long beat. The mechanical details were suddenly more urgent than the social discomfort. He looked from Thomas to Victoria, who was tapping her foot, radiating furious impatience. The situation was escalating, turning from a social insult into an actual complex problem. The private jet sat, a multi-million-dollar monument to immobility. Inside the cockpit, co-pilot Jones and First Officer Harrison stared at the flashing red alerts on the flight control computer, or FCC. The error code 774 Charlie was a hard fail, indicating a persistent, fatal error in the software-hardware handshake for the core flight surfaces. Specifically, the system was misinterpreting valid sensor data as runaway control input, locking the yaw and pitch stabilizers in a dangerous overstabilization loop. The plane was grounded, its mission impossible. Victoria Hale stormed back from the jet's ramp, her fury perfectly contained but intensely focused. "I don't pay your collective salaries to tell me what's not working," she snapped at the lead ground crew. "I pay you for solutions. I have a critical merger signing in 4 hours. This delay will cost my firm 9 figures. Get a temporary pilot." Now, her high-stakes reality was crashing into the immovable wall of physics. The ground manager stammered, pulling out his regulation manual. "Ms. Hale, the regulations state that a chartered pilot needs 24 hours rest, and the nearest one cleared for a G650 is 3 hours out by car. More critically, the FCC is red. No pilot, chartered or otherwise, will risk flying an aircraft with this critical failure. It's a liability that could tear the aircraft apart on takeoff due to overcorrection." Victoria threw her hands up in exasperation, pulling out her secure satellite phone. She frantically called 3 separate high-end flight services, demanding a replacement aircraft or a specialist engineer flown in by helicopter. All confirmed the same logistical impossibility. The weather blanketed the region, and no comparable jet could be prepped in time. Her meticulous planning had failed at the single most basic point: execution. Her frustration boiled over into pure, contemptuous sarcasm. She looked at Ethan, still patiently holding his daughter's hand near the periphery. "Oh, look, the man of all trades, Mr. Walker, the great mechanic, the single father, the philosopher of the grease pit. Since the professional airmen insist this bird is broken, and since you seem so competent around its machinery, can you fly it?" A few members of the ground crew snickered, finding momentary relief from the CEO's wrath. Co-pilot Jones, exiting the jet to confer, scoffed openly. "The man changes oil filters, ma'am. He doesn't command multi-million-dollar platforms." Leo, sensing the hostile energy, stopped reading. Her eyes, wide and filled with nervous worry, met her father's. She knew this was the moment of decision, the moment where her father had to choose between his quiet safety and the storm of expectation. Ethan stood up slowly, dusting the grime from his trousers. He ignored Victoria, addressing the technical crew. "Thomas, the 774 Charlie, is it confirmed as a persistent failsafe activation? It won't clear the redundancy loop because the system still believes it's receiving valid, but divergent, control data. It's a ghost in the machine." Thomas was stunned by the technical query, nodding rapidly. "It's exactly that, sir. We can't clear the initial pre-flight calibration sequence." Victoria stepped closer, misinterpreting his analysis as hesitation. Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, laced with pure spite. "Silence, mechanic. If you have no solution, get off my tarmac. Your technical jargon doesn't fix my multi-million-dollar problem. I'll fly us out in a helicopter if I have to." Ethan turned to face her, his quiet intensity overwhelming her high-volume anger. His eyes were cold, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Ms. Hale," he said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear, "flying this aircraft with a hard 774 Charlie error is a technical violation of safety protocols. It is considered an immediate write-off until the FCC is replaced. However, the error is an overstabilization loop from the previous maintenance cycle, not a true failure. The manufacturer installed a highly experimental, unlogged bypass in 2018. It can be temporarily bypassed using the manual yoke input calibration sequence, but that requires highly specific, disciplined control input during the first 5 minutes of the flight to convince the secondary system the primary is stable. This plane, in its current state, cannot be flown by a conventional commercial pilot. Co-pilot Jones stepped forward, furious. That's madness. The manual yoke is designed to be supportive, not primary. You'll tear the controls out trying to fight the FCC. Ethan looked directly at Jones. The FCC will only let go when it sees perfectly clean, human-directed data that it can't tag as spurious. It's a dance between man and algorithm, co-pilot, and that dance requires precise, rapid counter-input to the false corrections. Can you do it? Jones swallowed, his bravado gone. He was a commercial flyer, trained to trust automation. He couldn't. Ethan paused. He looked down at Leo, gave her a reassuring squeeze, and then looked directly into Victoria's stunned eyes. But it can be flown by me. He reached into his work bag and pulled out a worn, leather-bound document, his original military flight logbook. He placed it gently on the baggage cart bench beside Leo. I was an elite test pilot for 8 years. I have over 5,000 flight hours, 1,200 of them in classified prototypes with far worse control issues than a 774 Charlie. I am rated for this machine, and I know exactly how to bypass that overstabilization and fly this profile. I will not accept your absurd offer of marriage or any compensation. I will fly this aircraft only because I refuse to let a valuable piece of machinery sit unused over a software conflict that I know how to overcome. He looked at Thomas. Call the FAA control tower. Inform them an emergency, special clearance flight is being filed under the call sign Phoenix Alpha. Tell them the captain is Ethan Walker. Get internal confirmation on my credentials. My service number is 889-4432. Victoria Hale's jaw dropped. The airfield staff was dead silent. The man they had mocked was not just a pilot, but a legend with a call sign suggesting a history of specialized, high-risk work. The quiet mechanic had just become the only solution to her 9-figure problem. Ethan bent down one last time, kissing his daughter's forehead. I'll be right back, Bug. I'm just going to fly this the right way. He placed her safely in the waiting area, picked up his cap, and strode with purpose toward the air stair. Victoria, stunned into silence, mechanically followed Ethan onto the aircraft. She watched him move, not with the casual confidence of a commercial captain, but with the hyper-focused precision of a highly trained athlete entering a critical zone. In the cockpit, co-pilot Jones and First Officer Harrison looked utterly bewildered as the former mechanic took the left seat. Jones still looked terrified. Gentlemen, Ethan Walker, he stated, his voice calm and firm. We're flying in manual yoke calibration mode for the first 500 feet, then switching to secondary bus control. Your job is to monitor the primary FCC and call out any deviation greater than 1.5 degrees on the pitch indicator. Understood? They nodded weakly, completely overwhelmed. Harrison quickly began cross-checking the emergency manual, his face white. The ground crew, meanwhile, had executed the credential check. Thomas rushed the printout to Victoria's assistant. Victoria snatched the paper. The document wasn't a mere license. It was a military commendation citation. It detailed Ethan's tenure as a commander of advanced platform flight development, a role reserved for the best of the best. The reason for his quiet, sudden exit 3 years prior was also detailed, briefly and heartbreakingly. Immediate departure following the loss of family in a non-military civilian transport accident. The citation noted his prior professional incident, where he was cleared of fault but never forgave himself for the engineering failure that almost cost a life. His choice was about escaping professional liability, not capability. Victoria felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. She hadn't just mocked a mechanic, she had ridiculed a decorated hero trying to escape a profound, private trauma. His choice to work as a mechanic was not a limitation. It was a sanctuary. Ethan was already on the radio. His voice, now transmitted through the primary comm system, was sharp, clear, and perfectly modulated. The voice of pure authority. Miami Ground Control, this is Phoenix Alpha. Request emergency taxi clearance for immediate takeoff. Filing special clearance under ATC Waivers 7A. Request runway 6 for maximum acceleration. The air traffic controller, recognizing the call sign and the waiver, instantly responded with deference. Phoenix Alpha, you are cleared for immediate taxi to runway 6. Report ready for roll. The preparation sequence was terrifyingly fast and utterly professional. Ethan didn't waste a word. He bypassed the usual diagnostic systems with practiced keystrokes, knowing exactly which systems were corrupted and which were essential. He set the trim manually, a process usually handled by the FCC. He visually confirmed the flap setting and the elevator deflection. Every movement was economic, necessary, and lethal in its precision. Co-pilot Jones finally found his voice reading the checklist. Ethan simply nodded, already 3 steps ahead, confirming the next action with his eyes before the word was spoken. He glanced at the emergency checklist, glanced at it for a second, and then handed it back. He knew it by heart. Victoria, gripping her seat, realized he wasn't just capable. He was operating on a level of discipline she had never witnessed, even in the most pressure-filled boardroom. Her corporate power felt shallow, a joke compared to the power required to manually control a multi-ton aircraft with a failing computer. The jet rolled out, then paused. The final moment before liftoff. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as power was routed to the turbines. Victoria leaned back, bracing herself for the violent, fast acceleration of the G650. She had forgotten the dare entirely, consumed by fear and the crushing weight of her own mistake. The last sound she expected to hear, after the cockpit doors were secured, was the smooth, calm voice of the pilot addressing the cabin, a formality often skipped on private flights. The PA system crackled, then cleared. It was Ethan. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I am Captain Walker. We are experiencing a non-critical technical issue with the primary flight computer. We have executed a manual override and are departing on time. I assure you that every control surface, every system is currently functioning perfectly because it is under my direct, specific control. For the first few minutes, you may feel unusual. Rapid control input. Do not be alarmed. This is intentional. Relax, settle in, and enjoy the on-time departure. As the jet hurtled down the runway, the critical moment arrived. The 774 Charlie error began its false corrections. Victoria felt the yoke violently bucking against the co-pilot, visible even from the cabin door. Ethan didn't fight it, he danced with it. His hands moved with impossibly fast micro-corrections, anticipating the algorithm's mistake and providing the perfect opposite input. A seamless ballet of counter-pressure that tricked the secondary bus into accepting the human input as stable. For 30 seconds, the aircraft was on the razor's edge of stability, held in check only by Ethan's superhuman reflexes and deep understanding of the platform's flaws. Then, with a subtle thunk, the sound of the secondary system locking in, the bucking stopped. The plane lifted off the runway, smooth and steady, climbing into the sky with grace. Victoria Hale felt a wave of profound, universal shame wash over her. She had felt the danger. She had heard his voice. The sound of his voice, the voice of the man she had called a mechanic, the voice of the man she had cruelly challenged to marry her, was now the only thing keeping her and her 9-figure deal alive. Every smooth movement of the plane was a calculated rebuke to her arrogance. She had dared him to fly it perfectly, and she now realized he wouldn't fly it for her, for money, or for status. He would fly it perfectly because that was simply how he flew. Her social power had evaporated. Her wealth was irrelevant. She was entirely dependent on the quiet dignity and unspoken competence of the single dad she had tried to humiliate. The flight had barely begun, but the ultimate social inversion was already complete. The flight that followed was the quietest, smoothest Victoria had ever experienced. The manual controls meant no minute computer adjustments, no robotic overcorrections. The movement of the jet was fluid, almost organic, a perfect, seamless partnership between man and machine. She sat, watching the subtle movement of the wings, realizing that the discipline required to maintain this level of control was far beyond the skill required to manage a spreadsheet. Victoria slowly began to breathe normally. Her initial panic subsided, replaced by an intense forensic focus on the cockpit door. She watched the flight attendant move calmly, serving drinks, her earlier nervousness entirely gone. The crew was at ease, trusting the competence emanating from the front. Later, while cruising at altitude, Ethan left the yoke under the careful monitoring of co-pilot Jones, walking back to the small galley area for a cup of coffee. Victoria saw her opportunity. She approached him cautiously, her hands clasped in front of her. Her usual sharp body language was replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. "Captain Walker," she began, using his proper title for the first time. Ethan turned, his expression professional and neutral. "Ms. Hale, everything is stable. The air is calm at this altitude." I saw your credentials," she admitted, her voice low. "The records, the citations, and the reason for your departure. I am profoundly sorry for what you went through, and for my behavior today. It was reckless and cruel. I judge you based on a broken metric." Ethan simply leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee. "Your assessment is noted, Ms. Hale, but the past is irrelevant to the mission. Right now, the mission is to deliver you and your team safely and on time. That is all that matters." He maintained the boundary, refusing to engage in emotional currency. She persisted, trying to find a financial reason for his humility. "But wait, why the cover? Why the jumpsuit and the wrench? Why work as a technician when you could command top-tier international flights? You are leaving millions on the table. That is illogical." He glanced toward the rear of the cabin, where his daughter Leo was peacefully asleep on a plush seat, watched over by the flight attendant. The attendant had tucked a blanket around her and was reading the Astra comic book Ethan had left. "Control, Ms. Hale," he replied, his tone softer now. "In the air, I control the machine. I have power over altitude and speed, but I do not control the schedule, the geopolitical risk, or the time I spend away from her." He pointed toward Leo. "The high-level jobs, the command seats, the test runs, they require me to surrender control over my own schedule, my location, and my commitment to Leo. Being a mechanic, working on the ground, I am predictable. I am stable. I am always there to pick her up. That level of certainty, that constant presence, is the highest compensation there is. It is a logic your spreadsheets cannot quantify." Victoria finally understood the depth of the humility she had mistaken for poverty. He wasn't stuck doing a lesser job. He chose a greater one: fatherhood. His power was not demonstrated by his title, but by his quiet priorities. She watched Leo sleeping, her face serene, and realized that Ethan's choices were fundamentally superior to her own. The flight continued seamlessly. As the plane began its long, gentle descent into their destination, Victoria sat back, watching the world blur past. She didn't check her stock portfolio. She didn't review her merger notes. She sat in a long, quiet silence. The absolute certainty in Ethan's voice had stripped away her arrogance, replacing it with a slow, powerful respect. Her social currency meant nothing here. His quiet competence meant everything. The landing was perfect, so smooth it was barely noticeable. They arrived 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Victoria Hale was no longer smiling. Her silence was a sign of total, crushing defeat, a defeat of her prejudice. Ethan and Leo were the last to exit the plane. Victoria Hale waited for them at the foot of the air stair on the tarmac, dismissed her entourage, and stood alone under the vast, quiet expanse of the airport. As Ethan reached the ground, she met his eyes. She looked different, smaller, stripped of her corporate armor. Her expression was solemn. She spoke, her voice thick with emotion, repeating the words from the hook, but changing the meaning entirely. "Fly it perfectly and I'll marry you." She shook her head slowly. "I was wrong. I was unforgivably wrong. I apologize for the cruelest assumption I have ever made. Ethan accepted the apology with a simple nod. He knew she meant it. She wasn't negotiating a contract. She was making moral reparations. She continued, offering a lifeline. I can change your life. I can offer you a guaranteed position as Chief of Flight Operations, a 7-figure salary, absolute control over your schedule, and guaranteed ground time. You can work remotely half the year. Use my resources, Captain. Use them to honor your skills. Ethan looked at the enormous jet behind him, then down at his daughter's hand, holding his tightly. Ms. Hale, he said softly, my work is already honored. I chose this life. I chose the predictable schedule and the predictable pay because it ensures I'm always here for Leo. He firmly rejected the offer. You asked how to make it right. You already did. You learned the value of a person isn't tied to their job title. That is payment enough for me. Victoria sighed, recognizing the strength required for such rejection. Then what is your legacy from this? What will you take away? Ethan paused, then smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. I take away the fact that I protected my daughter's stability, and I proved that a broken machine can still fly, as long as it has a disciplined hand on the stick. And I get to go home on time. He finally turned to walk away, leading Leo toward the hangar. Leo looked up at her father, her eyes shining with admiration. Daddy, she whispered, did you win the challenge? Ethan stopped, kneeling down one last time to look at her. His eyes held a reflection of his quiet victory. I didn't win, Bug, he said, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. I just flew it the right way. He stood up, the single dad in his work clothes, the true authority in the entire airport. Victoria Hale watched them disappear, the CEO who had learned that true power resides not in control, but in the choice to remain humble. Her foolish challenge had become her greatest, most expensive lesson. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe too. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.